A desperate pregnant woman, bleeding and abandoned by her billionaire husband, collapses in a luxury building's hallway. The janitor cleaning that night makes a split-second decision that will bind their lives together for the next 20 years. What starts as a single act of compassion becomes a battle against wealth, power, and a system designed to crush the vulnerable. This is the story of family built not from blood, but from the courage to stay when everyone else walks away. Welcome back, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I want to thank you for being here. Your presence matters more than you know. If you enjoy these stories about resilience, unexpected family, and the power of showing up, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us reach more people who need to hear these truths. And drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love connecting with you from all corners of the world. Now let's dive into a story that will remind you why kindness is never wasted. The mop hit the marble floor at the wrong angle and water shot across the hallway in a thin arc. David stopped mid-stroke, chest tightening as the droplets caught the overhead light before landing 6 inches from the oriental runner. He dragged the mop back, soaking up the water before it could spread. His knees protested as he crouched to check the edge of the rug. Dry. The relief lasted exactly as long as it took him to hear footsteps coming from the east wing. Heavy footsteps. Multiple sets. David straightened, both hands on the mop handle. The hallway stretched 60 feet in either direction. All white marble and recessed lighting that made every scuff mark visible. He'd been cleaning this building for 3 years. He knew which footsteps belonged to security making rounds, which belonged to the night staff leaving through the service entrance. These were different. A woman's voice cut through the silence, high and strained. "Please, just let me get my things out." A man's voice, cold enough that David felt it from 40 feet away. Now. They emerged from around the corner. A woman in a silk robe stumbling forward, one hand pressed against the wall for balance, the other wrapped around her stomach. Behind her, a man in a tailored suit and a security guard in uniform. The woman's face was pale, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders. She wasn't walking right. Each step looked like it cost her something. "Mr. Castellano, please." She reached back toward the man in the suit. "The baby. I need to see a doctor. You need to leave my property." The man, Castellano, didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. "Before I have you removed." David's hands tightened on the mop. He should move. Get back to the utility closet. Stay out of sight. Let whatever this was play out without witnesses. He didn't move. The woman stopped walking. Her whole body went rigid, one hand still on the wall, the other pressed harder against her stomach. "Victor, I'm bleeding. Not my problem." Castellano nodded to the security guard. "Get her out." The guard reached for the woman's arm. She jerked away, lost her balance, and hit the wall hard enough that the sound echoed down the hallway. David's mop clattered against the floor. All 3 of them turned to look at him. The woman's eyes met his for less than a second, dark, wide, desperate, before Castellano stepped between them. "You." Castellano's attention fixed on David like a physical weight. "You work here?" David's throat went dry. "Yes, sir." "Just finishing the night shift. Then finish it somewhere else." The dismissal was absolute. Castellano had already turned back to the woman, already forgotten David existed. David bent to pick up his mop. His hands were shaking. He'd been fired from 2 jobs in the past year for getting involved in things that weren't his business. He had rent due in 6 days and $43 in his checking account. The woman made a sound, small, choked, pain trying to stay quiet. David's hands went still on the mop handle. She was doubled over now, both arms wrapped around her middle, her breathing sharp and shallow. The security guard had stepped back, looking uncertainly at Castellano. I said get her out. Castellano's voice dropped lower. Before I call the police and have her arrested for trespassing. Trespassing? The woman's voice broke. This is my home. Was your home? Past tense. Castellano pulled out his phone, already dialing. You have 60 seconds before I make this official. The woman straightened with visible effort, her face going blank in a way that made David's chest hurt. She'd stopped arguing, stopped pleading. Just started walking toward the main entrance, each step careful and measured like she was afraid of breaking. She made it 10 feet before her knees buckled. The security guard caught her before she hit the floor. Sir, she needs medical. She needs to leave. Castellano didn't look up from his phone. Put her in a cab. Bill it to her account. She still has access until midnight. David watched the guard half carry the woman toward the entrance, watched her try to hold her own weight and fail. Watched Castellano turn and walk back toward the east wing without a single glance back. The lobby doors opened with a pneumatic hiss. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and exhaust fumes. David moved before he could think about it. He caught up to them at the top of the steps outside. The woman was leaning heavily against the guard, her face gray under the streetlights. I can take her. The words came out rougher than David intended. The guard looked at him, then at the woman, then back through the glass doors toward the empty lobby. You sure? Yeah. The guard transferred the woman's weight to David with obvious relief. Cab's on its way. Should be here in 5. David nodded. The guard disappeared back inside. The woman sagged against David's shoulder, her breath coming in short gasps. Up close, he could see the sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold. Could feel her shaking. Hey. He shifted his grip, trying to take more of her weight. Stay with me. Cab's coming. She didn't respond. Her eyes were closed, her jaw clenched tight. David looked down the street. Empty. No headlights. No cab. The woman made that sound again, small and choked and wrong. Forget the cab. David's decision made itself. I've got a car, 2 blocks over. Can you walk? Her eyes opened. Found his. She nodded once. It took them 15 minutes to cover 2 blocks. David had to stop 3 times when her legs gave out, holding her upright while she fought through whatever was happening inside her body. By the time they reached his car, a 15-year-old Honda with a cracked windshield and rust eating through the rear panel, she was barely conscious. He got her into the passenger seat, fumbling with the seatbelt around her swollen belly. Her head lolled back against the headrest, her breathing shallow. David slid behind the wheel and started the engine. It turned over twice before catching. Nearest hospital is St. Mary's. He pulled out into traffic, watching her from the corner of his eye. 10 minutes if the lights cooperate. She didn't answer. Her hand had moved to her stomach again, pressing against the silk robe. In the glow from the dashboard, David could see dark stains spreading across the pale fabric. He pressed harder on the gas. The ER nurse took one look at the woman and called for a gurney. David stepped back as they swarmed her, asking questions she couldn't answer, cutting through the silk robe to access her stomach. Sir? Another nurse appeared at his elbow. Are you family? No, I found her. Do you know her name? David realized he didn't. No. Emergency contact. No. The nurse's expression shifted into something professionally neutral. We'll need you to fill out some paperwork. If you could wait over there. David moved to the plastic chairs against the wall and sat. His work uniform, gray coveralls with Prestige Building Services embroidered on the chest, was damp where the woman had leaned against him. His hands were still shaking. He should leave. He'd done his part. Got her to the hospital. Let the professionals take over. He stayed in the chair. 40 minutes later, a doctor emerged from behind the privacy curtain. She scanned the waiting room, her gaze landing on David. "You brought in the pregnant patient?" David stood. "Yeah, is she stable, for now?" The doctor moved closer, lowering her voice. "She's experiencing a placental abruption. We're prepping her for emergency surgery." The words meant nothing to David. "Is she going to be okay?" "We're doing everything we can." The doctor hesitated. "She keeps asking for someone named Victor. Do you know how to reach him?" David thought about Castellano's face. The cold dismissal. The way he'd walked away without looking back. "No," he said. The doctor nodded, unsurprised. "If you could wait, we may have more questions." She disappeared back through the curtain. David sank into the chair again. 3 hours passed. The waiting room emptied and filled and emptied again. David's shift supervisor called twice. He let it go to voicemail. Dawn was breaking outside when the doctor reappeared. "She made it through surgery." The exhaustion was evident in every word. "Baby's in the NICU. 28 weeks. Too early, but viable." "And her?" "Critical, but stable. She lost a lot of blood." The doctor paused. "She has no insurance information on file, no emergency contacts, no ID. The business office is going to want to speak with you about payment arrangements." "I don't know her," David said again. "I can't. I understand." The doctor's expression didn't change. "But right now, you're all she has." David called in sick to work. His supervisor didn't believe him. Didn't matter. He'd already missed the entire night shift. Probably already fired. He spent the day in the hospital cafeteria, drinking coffee that tasted like metal and checking his phone every 10 minutes for messages that didn't come. At 3 p.m., a social worker found him. "Mr. Chen?" She was young, professional, carrying a tablet and a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Torres. David Torres." "Mr. Torres. I'm Sarah Kim from Patient Services. I was hoping we could talk about Jane Doe and 412. David's coffee had gone cold. He pushed it away. "I told the doctor. I don't know her." "I understand. But you did bring her in." Sarah sat without waiting for an invitation. "Which makes you the closest thing she has to a contact person right now." "What about the baby's father?" Something flickered across Sarah's face. "She's been awake for about an hour. She's not asking for anyone." David thought about that. About what it meant to wake up alone after surgery, in a strange place, with your child somewhere you couldn't see them. "Can I see her?" Sarah's expression shifted. Relief, maybe. "Room 412, 4th floor, 5 minutes. Then she needs rest." The elevator took forever. David rode it alone, watching the numbers climb, trying to figure out what he was going to say to a woman whose name he didn't know. Room 412 was at the end of a quiet hallway. The door was half open. David knocked anyway. "Come in." Her voice was rough, barely there. She was sitting up in bed, surrounded by monitors and IV lines. The silk robe was gone, replaced by a hospital gown. Her dark hair was pulled back from her face, showing the hollows under her eyes, the grayish tint to her skin. She looked at David for a long moment. Recognition dawned slowly. "You," she said. "Yeah." David stayed in the doorway. "How are you feeling?" A sound that might have been a laugh. "Like someone cut me open and put me back together wrong." David took a careful step into the room. "The doctor said the baby's okay. In the NICU, but okay." Her whole body went rigid. "My baby is alive," David said quickly. "Breathing on her own. They said that's good, for 28 weeks. The woman's hands fisted in the thin hospital blanket. "Her?" "Yeah, a girl." The tears came silently, tracking down her face without expression, without sound. David looked away, giving her privacy. I should go, he said after a moment. Just wanted to make sure you were… Wait. Her voice stopped him at the door. I don't have anyone to call. No one who would come. David turned back. She was looking at him directly now, her dark eyes clear despite the tears. The social worker said they'll move you to a recovery floor tomorrow, David said. You'll be here a few days, probably. And then? The question hung in the air between them. David didn't have an answer. She looked down at her hands. I'm sorry. You've done more than enough. I shouldn't… Where were you planning to go? David heard himself ask. Before. Tonight. I don't know. She said it simply, stating a fact. I hadn't thought that far ahead. David pulled the visitor's chair closer to the bed and sat. What's your name? Natalie. She hesitated. Natalie Castellano. The last name hit David like cold water. He sat back in the chair. Victor Castellano's wife, he said. Ex-wife. Natalie's voice went flat. As of 6 hours ago, apparently. David thought about the penthouse hallway, the marble floors, the security guard, the man who'd walked away without looking back. He threw you out, David said. While you were pregnant. He threw me out because I'm pregnant. Natalie's hand moved to her stomach, still swollen, now bandaged beneath the gown. This baby isn't his. The word settled between them, heavy and undeniable. David should stand up, should walk out, should let this woman, this billionaire's ex-wife who'd cheated and gotten caught, handle her own mess. He stayed in the chair. Whose is it? He asked. Natalie's laugh was bitter. Does it matter? Probably not. She looked at him then. Really looked. Taking in the work coveralls, the tired eyes, the rough hands folded in his lap. Why are you still here? David didn't have a good answer for that. I don't know. You should go. This isn't your problem. Yeah, David said. Probably not. Neither of them moved. David went home at midnight. His apartment was a studio in a building where the heat worked intermittently and the neighbors fought in 3 different languages. He lay on the mattress on the floor and stared at the ceiling and thought about Natalie Castellano alone in a hospital room and a baby girl in the NICU with no one to visit her. He was back at the hospital by 7 a.m. Natalie was asleep when he arrived, her face relaxed in a way it hadn't been while conscious. David sat in the visitor's chair and waited. She woke 20 minutes later, her eyes finding him immediately. You came back, she said. Yeah. Why? David had thought about that all night. I don't know. Natalie shifted in the bed, wincing. That's a terrible reason. Probably. A nurse came in to check vitals, gave David a curious look, and left. The silence stretched out between them, not quite comfortable, not quite tense. The social worker came by this morning, Natalie said finally. They're releasing me tomorrow. They gave me a list of shelters. David's hands tightened on the arms of the chair. Shelters. For women in crisis. Natalie's voice stayed carefully neutral. Apparently, I qualify. What about money? You were married to Victor Castellano. All the accounts are frozen. Prenup was very specific about infidelity. She said it matter-of-factly, like she was reading a weather report. I have nothing. No access to anything until the divorce is finalized, which could take months. Maybe longer, depending on how vindictive Victor wants to be. Jesus. I knew the risks. Natalie turned her head to look out the window. I knew what would happen if he found out. I didn't think it would happen like this. David followed her gaze. The window looked out over the parking lot, gray and mundane in the morning light. Who's the father? He asked again. This time, Natalie answered. Daniel, Victor's business partner. Her voice went quieter. He promised he'd leave his wife, that we'd figure it out together. That was before he knew about the baby. And now? Now his number's disconnected. His office says he's on an extended business trip to Singapore. His wife's lawyer sent me a cease and desist letter. Natalie's hands fisted in the blanket again. I'm the scandal he needs to bury. Victor knows it. Daniel knows it. Everyone knows it except me, apparently, until it was too late. David sat with that, with the picture it painted of Natalie Castellano, not a villain, not a victim, just a woman who'd made a choice and was learning the cost of it in real time. The baby, he said. Have you seen her? Natalie's expression cracked. They said I can go tomorrow. When I'm stronger. They have to wheel me down in a chair because I can't walk that far yet. I could take you. She looked at him sharply. Why would you do that? David stood, shoving his hands in his pockets. Because nobody should meet their kid alone. The NICU was on the second floor. Behind 2 sets of locked doors and a nurse's station where they had to scrub in and put on gowns. David pushed Natalie's wheelchair through the quiet hallways, past rows of incubators and monitors and tiny humans fighting to survive. They stopped at incubator 7. The baby was impossibly small. 3 pounds, the nurse had said. Covered in tubes and wires, a tiny knit cap on her head, her chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. Natalie made a sound David had never heard before, something between a gasp and a sob and prayer. You can touch her, the nurse said gently. Through the ports. Natalie's hands shook as she reached through the circular openings in the incubator's side. Her fingers brushed the baby's arm, so small that Natalie's hand looked enormous by comparison. The baby's fingers twitched, curled. Found Natalie's thumb and gripped it with surprising strength. Natalie broke. David stepped back, giving her space as she bent over the incubator, crying silently, her whole body shaking with the force of it. The nurse looked at him with professional sympathy and moved on to check other patients. David waited. When Natalie finally straightened, her face was blotchy and wet, but something had shifted in her expression, something that looked almost like hope. She's fighting, Natalie whispered. Look at her. She's so small, but she's fighting. David looked at the tiny girl in the incubator, at the monitors showing her heart rate, her oxygen levels, all the numbers that meant she was alive and working for it. Yeah, he said. She is. They stayed for an hour. Natalie talked to the baby through the incubator, told her about the world waiting outside, promised her things would be okay, even though David could hear the uncertainty in every word. When they finally left, Natalie was exhausted, slumped in the wheelchair, her hands trembling from emotion and physical strain. David wheeled her back to her room in silence. Thank you, Natalie said as he helped her back into bed. For that. Don't thank me yet, David said. You're being discharged tomorrow. Where are you going to go? Natalie's expression went carefully blank. The shelter, I guess. It's temporary, until I figure something out. David thought about the shelter addresses on the social workers list, thought about Natalie sleeping in a room with strangers, trying to heal from surgery while navigating shared bathrooms and curfews and rules designed for a different kind of crisis. Thought about the baby in the NICU, fighting for every breath, with no one to visit her except the mother who could barely afford to feed herself. Or, David heard himself say, you could stay with me. Natalie's head snapped up. What? It's not much. Studio apartment, 1 mattress, heat that works maybe half the time. David couldn't believe the words coming out of his mouth. But it's private, and it's close to the hospital. 20-minute bus ride. I can't. You can, David said. Until you figure something else out. Until you're healed enough to work, to apply for assistance, whatever you need to do. Natalie stared at him. You don't even know me. No, David agreed. I don't. This is insane. Probably. Why would you? Natalie's voice broke. Why would you help me? After what I did? Because someone should, David said simply. And right now, I'm the only someone who showed up. David's supervisor fired him over the phone the next morning. No surprise, no real regret. He'd been late too many times, missed too many shifts, brought too many problems to a job that required invisibility. He picked Natalie up from the hospital at noon. She'd changed into donated clothes from the hospital's charity closet. Jeans that didn't quite fit over her swollen stomach. A t-shirt that hung loose. Sneakers without socks. All her belongings fit in a plastic bag. Her phone, disconnected. A wallet, empty except for IDs that would soon bear her maiden name, and a hospital bracelet she'd already removed. The bus ride to David's apartment took 30 minutes. Natalie stared out the window the whole time, her face unreadable. David's building looked worse in daylight, peeling paint, cracked concrete steps, windows covered with cardboard and duct tape. He unlocked 3 separate locks on his door and held it open. It's not much, he said again. Natalie stepped inside. The studio was maybe 300 square feet. Mattress on the floor in one corner. Mini fridge and hot plate in the opposite corner. Bathroom so small you had to step over the toilet to reach the shower. No proper closet, just a tension rod with wire hangers. It's perfect, Natalie said quietly. David didn't know what to do with that. You can have the mattress. I'll sleep on the floor. David. Not negotiable. He pulled the only pillow off the mattress and tossed it in the corner. You just had surgery. You need actual rest. Natalie sank onto the mattress with visible relief, her hand going to her incision automatically. I don't know how to repay you for this. Don't worry about it. I'm serious. I have nothing. No money, no job, no prospects. Then we'll figure it out together. David crouched to rummage through the mini fridge. You like ramen? A pause. Then, quietly. I've never had ramen. David looked at her. Really looked. At the woman who'd lived in a penthouse with marble floors and oriental runners, who'd been married to a billionaire, who'd probably never worried about money or food or heat in her entire life. Well, he said, pulling out 2 packages of instant noodles. You're about to get an education. They fell into a routine. David woke at 5 a.m. to search job listings online at the library. Natalie slept until 8, then walked, slowly, painfully, to the hospital, to spend hours sitting beside Incubator 7, talking to a baby who couldn't hear her yet, but might, someday, remember the sound of her voice. David picked up day labor when he could find it. Construction cleanup. Warehouse inventory. Anything that paid cash and didn't ask questions. The money barely covered rent and food, let alone the bus fare to the hospital. 3 weeks in, Natalie's incision had healed enough that she could move without wincing. The baby, still unnamed, still in the NICU, had gained 4 ounces and graduated from a breathing tube to a nasal cannula. David came home one evening to find Natalie cleaning the apartment. She'd scrubbed the bathroom, organized his meager belongings, and somehow made the studio look almost livable. You didn't have to do that, David said. I needed to do something. Natalie wrung out the dish rag over the sink. I can't just keep taking from you without giving anything back. You're healing. That's enough. It's not. She turned to face him, something fierce in her expression. I need to contribute. I need to work. You can't work yet. Doctor said minimum 6 weeks. I can answer phones, file papers, something. Natalie's hands twisted the dish rag. I can't just sit here while you kill yourself trying to keep us fed. David wanted to argue. Wanted to tell her it was fine, he could handle it, she should focus on recovering and visiting her daughter, but his bank account had $12 in it. And rent was due in 4 days. Okay, he said. We'll figure something out. Natalie found work at a call center that didn't ask too many questions. 3rd shift, minimum wage, sitting in a cubicle reading scripts to people who hung up before she finished speaking. The hours were brutal, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., but the pay was immediate and the supervisors didn't care about her lack of recent employment history. David took an overnight security position at a storage facility across town. They'd each leave at 10 p.m., pass each other on the bus route with tired waves, and return in the morning to trade updates about the baby before collapsing into sleep. It was unsustainable. David knew it. Natalie knew it. They kept going anyway. 6 weeks after Natalie moved in, the baby was strong enough to breathe on her own. The NICU nurse called at 3 a.m. while David was at work and Natalie was on her dinner break. David got the voicemail when his shift ended. He called Natalie immediately. "Did you hear?" Her voice was thick with tears. "She's breathing alone. They removed all the tubes. David, she's breathing. That's incredible." David's own throat was tight. "When can you see her?" "I'm going now. I don't care if I get fired. I have to. I have to see her." "Go," David said. "I'll meet you there." He caught a bus across town, another bus to the hospital, and arrived at the NICU out of breath and 40 minutes late for his next shift. He didn't care. Natalie was standing at incubator 7, her hands pressed against the clear plastic, her face transformed. The baby, still tiny, still fragile, but visibly stronger, was awake, her dark eyes open and searching. "She looks like you," David said. Natalie laughed through tears. "You think?" "Yeah." David moved closer. "Definitely." They stood together, watching the baby girl who'd survived against odds that should have crushed her, who'd fought her way through 28 weeks of development compressed into 8 weeks of intensive care, who had no father worth mentioning, and a mother who'd lost everything except the will to keep showing up. "I want to name her Hope," Natalie said quietly. "Is that too on the nose?" David thought about it, about the baby in the incubator, about Natalie sleeping on a mattress on the floor, about himself working overnight shifts to keep them fed, about how none of this should have worked, and yet, here they were. "No," he said, "it's perfect." Hope came home on a Tuesday in February. She weighed 5 pounds, needed to eat every 2 hours, and cried with a force that seemed impossible for something so small. David's apartment had never felt smaller. The mattress on the floor became Natalie's, and David slept sitting up in the corner so he could help with night feedings. The mini fridge held formula instead of food. The bathroom counter was covered in bottles and nipples and sterilization equipment. They were exhausted, broke, running on coffee and determination and the occasional 4 hours of sleep. And somehow, impossibly, they were okay. Natalie quit the call center, couldn't manage 3rd shift with a newborn. David picked up extra hours at the storage facility, which meant he was working 16-hour days and sleeping in 3-hour shifts. It couldn't last. Something had to break. It did. 2 weeks after Hope came home. David came back from his shift to find Natalie sitting on the mattress, Hope asleep in her arms, staring at her phone screen with an expression he couldn't read. "What's wrong?" David dropped his bag by the door. Natalie held up the phone. "Victor's getting remarried." The announcement was everywhere. Social media, gossip sites, the business section of the Times. Victor Castellano and his new fiancée, photographed at some charity gala, looking perfect and wealthy and completely untouched by consequence. 4 months, Natalie said flatly. We've been divorced 4 months and he's already found someone else. David sat on the floor beside the mattress. You okay? I don't know. Natalie looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully against her chest. I should be angry. Or hurt. Or something. But I just feel nothing. That's probably healthy. Is it? Natalie's thumb brushed Hope's tiny fist. I destroyed my life for a man who stopped loving me the second I became inconvenient, and now he's just moving on. Like I never existed. David didn't have an answer for that. He reached out and adjusted Hope's blanket, making sure she was covered. You exist, he said finally. Right here. With her. Natalie's eyes were wet when she looked at him. How do you do that? Do what? Always say exactly the right thing. David laughed quietly. I mostly just say things. Sometimes they land right. Hope stirred, making small distressed sounds. Natalie shifted her automatically, rocking gently until the baby settled. I need to find a real job, Natalie said. Something with benefits, insurance, daycare coverage. Okay. I don't have a degree. My only work experience is 3 years as Victor's wife, which apparently doesn't count for anything. We'll figure it out. You keep saying that. Because it's true. David stood, moving to the hot plate to start water for formula. We've figured out everything else so far. Have we? Natalie's voice was quiet. Or are we just surviving day to day until something breaks? David didn't answer. Because she was right. They were barely holding on and they both knew it. The break came 3 days later. David's storage facility position ended. Seasonal work, they said. Nothing personal. Natalie couldn't find childcare she could afford, which meant she couldn't work. Their rent was 2 weeks late. The landlord had left 3 increasingly threatening notices on the door. They had 48 hours before eviction. David spent those hours on his phone, calling every contact he had, begging for work, for loans, for anything. He came up empty. Everyone he knew was in the same position, broke, struggling, one crisis away from homelessness. Natalie spent those hours holding hope, memorizing her daughter's face, trying not to think about what happened to mothers and babies with nowhere to go. At midnight on the second day, David made a decision. I'm going to Victor, he said. Natalie's head snapped up. What? Your ex-husband. I'm going to ask him for help. David? No, he's Hope's biological uncle. Daniel was his business partner. That makes her family, technically. He won't care. Natalie's voice was certain. He threw me out while I was bleeding. He's not going to... Maybe not. David pulled on his jacket. But I have to try. This is insane. He'll have you arrested for trespassing. Probably. David checked his wallet. $8 and an expired bus pass. But we're out of options, so I'm going to try the insane thing. He left before Natalie could stop him. The penthouse building looked the same as it had 4 months ago. Same marble lobby, same security desk, same overnight guard who'd helped remove Natalie. The guard recognized David immediately. You can't be here. I need to see Victor Castellano. Mr. Castellano doesn't take visitors at... The guard checked his watch. 2 a.m. It's about his ex-wife and his business partner's daughter. Something shifted in the guard's expression. Wait here. He disappeared into a back office. David waited, counting his heartbeats, preparing himself for rejection or police or both. The guard returned 5 minutes later. Mr. Burr, Castellano will give you 5 minutes. Penthouse level. Elevator requires a key card. He handed David a visitor badge and a temporary access card. David took them with shaking hands. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt like it took hours. When the doors opened, Victor Castellano was waiting in the marble hallway where David had first seen Natalie. He looked exactly the same. Tailored suit, despite the hour. Expression of controlled disdain. Eyes that evaluated and dismissed in the same glance. "You're the janitor," Victor said. "Yeah. You have 3 minutes. Talk." David's prepared speech evaporated. He stood in the hallway. His mop bucket had probably stood in this exact spot 4 months ago, and tried to find words. "Natalie needs help," he said finally. Natalie made her choices. Victor's expression didn't change. "She can live with the consequences. She is living with them. She's working minimum wage, living in a studio with no heat, trying to raise Daniel's daughter alone. Not my problem." "That baby is your family." "That baby," Victor said with precise coldness, "is the product of my wife's affair with my business partner. She represents betrayal, humiliation, a scandal that cost me 6 months and considerable resources to bury. Why would I help her?" David's hands clenched. "Because she's a baby. Because she didn't choose any of this. Because nothing." Victor turned toward the door to his penthouse. "My charity has limits. Natalie exceeded them. You have 2 minutes to leave before I call security. We're being evicted." The words came out harsh, desperate. "In 48 hours. Natalie and Hope will be on the street because we can't make rent. If you could just what? Rescue the woman who destroyed my marriage? Support the child who represents that destruction?" Victor's voice never rose, never showed emotion. "You mistake me for someone who cares about sob stories. I'm not. I'm a businessman. I make calculated decisions. And this decision is simple. Natalie chose her path. She can walk it alone." David stood there, feeling something crack inside his chest. "You're really going to let a baby end up homeless. I'm going to let an ex-wife who cheated on me face reality. What happens to her child is unfortunate, but irrelevant to me." The elevator doors opened behind David. 2 security guards stepped out. "Your time is up," Victor said. "Leave. Don't come back." The guards escorted David to the lobby. Put him out on the street, watched him walk away. David made it 2 blocks before he had to stop, lean against a building, and fight the urge to put his fist through something. He'd failed. Completely. Utterly. He pulled out his phone to call Natalie, to tell her to start packing, to prepare for whatever came next. The phone rang in his hand before he could dial. Unknown number. "Hello? Mr. Torres?" A woman's voice, professional and brisk. "This is Patricia Chen from Castellano Holdings. I'm Mr. Victor Castellano's executive assistant." David's stomach dropped. "If this is about..." "Mr. Castellano asked me to reach out regarding your visit tonight." A pause. "He's arranged for a payment to be made to your landlord. Your rent will be current through the end of the year." David's brain stuttered. "What?" "Additionally, he's established a trust for the child. Hope Torres, correct?" Papers rustled. "The trust will provide for her medical expenses, childcare, and basic living costs until she turns 18. Payments will be made directly to verified service providers. No cash disbursements." "I don't understand." Mr. Castellano wants to be clear. This is not charity. This is a business decision. The scandal of a homeless infant connected to his former business partner would be problematic. This arrangement solves that problem while maintaining distance. David leaned harder against the building. He's helping her. He's protecting his interests. The distinction matters to him. Patricia's tone shifted, becoming almost human. "The trust documents will be sent to your address. You'll need to sign as the child's guardian. Natalie Castellano is excluded from all financial decisions per the divorce settlement. She's the mother. She's also the party who violated the prenuptial agreement. The trust bypasses her entirely. You'll receive a small stipend for your role as trustee. $500 monthly. David's mind was reeling. Why me? You showed up at 2 a.m. to advocate for a child who isn't yours. Mr. Castellano finds that notable. Another pause. The documents will arrive tomorrow. Read them carefully. Sign them if you accept the terms. Refuse them if you don't. Those are your only options. She hung up. David stood on the empty street, phone still pressed to his ear, trying to process what had just happened. Victor had said no, had dismissed him, had called security, and then, somehow, had arranged everything. The documents arrived by courier at 9 a.m. David and Natalie read them together while Hope slept in her second-hand bassinet. The trust was real, comprehensive, cold in its precision, but undeniable in its scope. Hope would have health care, education funds, living expenses, all managed by David, reported quarterly to a board of trustees, audited annually. Natalie couldn't touch a cent of it. "He's cutting me out," Natalie said quietly. "Even of my own daughter's life." "No." David scanned the document again. "He's cutting you out of the money, not her life. You're still her mother. You just can't control the finances. Because he doesn't trust me. Because the prenup doesn't allow it." David looked at her over the papers. "This isn't about trust. It's about liability." Natalie's hands were shaking. "I should be angry. Are you?" "I don't know." She looked at Hope, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos swirling around her. "He's providing for her. He's keeping her fed and housed and healthy. That's more than Daniel ever did. More than I could do alone." David set the papers down. "The question is whether you can live with it. With me having control of Hope's money. With Victor's lawyers auditing every expense. Can you live with it?" Natalie countered. "With being tied to us indefinitely? With the responsibility of managing a trust you never asked for?" David thought about that. About the last 4 months. About the midnight feedings and the bus rides to the NICU and the ramen dinners and the mattress on the floor. About showing up when no one else had. "Yeah," he said. "I can live with it." Natalie's eyes were wet. "Why?" "Why are you doing this?" "Because someone has to." David picked up the pen the courier had left. "And I'm already here." He signed the documents. Life changed slowly, then all at once. The rent was paid. The utilities stayed on. Hope had formula and diapers and doctor's appointments covered by insurance that actually worked. Natalie found a job at a nonprofit. Decent pay, normal hours, benefits that included childcare. David's trustee stipend wasn't much, but it was steady. He used it to enroll in night classes at the community college. Business administration, maybe accounting. Something that would make him more than just a janitor with good intentions. They stayed in the studio apartment. Upgraded the mattress to an actual bed frame. Added a crib for Hope. Bought a small table so they could eat sitting up. It wasn't luxury. It wasn't even comfort, but it was stable. And stability, David was learning, was its own kind of wealth. Hope grew. 6 months, 9 months, a year. She started crawling, then walking, then getting into everything in the tiny apartment. She had Natalie's dark eyes and Daniel's nose, and a personality entirely her own. Stubborn, curious, fiercely attached to both her mother and the man she'd learned to call Dada, despite having no biological claim to the title. David never corrected her. Natalie went back to school. Online classes, paid for by grants and scholarships, and the kind of determination that came from having failed once and refusing to fail again. She was working toward a degree in social work, helping women in crisis, women like she'd been, women who needed someone to show up when everyone else walked away. David finished his associate's degree, Got a job at an accounting firm as a junior bookkeeper. The pay was better than security work. The hours were better than overnight shifts, and the future looked like something more than just survival. They were okay. Not perfect. Not fixed. But okay. And then, 3 years after that night in the penthouse hallway, David got a phone call. "Mr. Torres, this is Patricia Chen." David's hand tightened on the phone. "Is something wrong with the trust?" "No. The trust is performing well. This is a different matter." Patricia paused. "Daniel Reeves is back in the country. He's filed for custody of Hope." The world tilted sideways. "What?" "He claims parental rights. He has DNA evidence proving paternity. His lawyers are arguing that he was unaware of Hope's existence until recently and wants to establish a relationship with his daughter." David's mind was racing. He disappeared. For 3 years. Natalie couldn't even find him. His lawyers are arguing he was protecting himself from a hostile situation. They're painting Natalie as unstable and you as... Patricia's voice went carefully neutral. "An unrelated party with inappropriate influence over the child. I'm her trustee. Victor appointed me. The trust is separate from custody. Daniel isn't challenging the financial arrangements. He's challenging physical custody." Another pause. "He wants Hope to live with him and his wife. He's offering Natalie supervised visitation rights." David felt his chest constrict. "When's the hearing?" 3 weeks. "I'm calling as a courtesy. The trust board wants to ensure Hope's interests are protected. If you need legal representation, the trust can provide resources." Natalie needs representation. Natalie's affairs are separate from the trust's concerns. Patricia's tone made it clear this was non-negotiable. But the trust will defend its structure, which means defending your role as trustee, which means functionally defending the current custody arrangement. David understood. Victor wasn't helping Natalie. He was protecting his own interests, again, but the result was the same. "Send me the lawyer information," David said. The custody battle was brutal. Daniel's lawyers painted Natalie as an adulterer who'd hidden a pregnancy to extort money. Painted David as a janitor with a savior complex who'd manipulated his way into a child's life for financial gain. They had evidence. Photographs of the studio apartment. Bank statements showing David's previous financial instability. Character witnesses who testified to Natalie's poor judgment and unstable lifestyle choices. Daniel himself was sympathetic on the stand. Remorseful. He'd been scared, he said. Overwhelmed. He'd made mistakes, but he was ready now to be a father. He and his wife had a home in Connecticut. A stable life. Private schools. Everything a child could need. Natalie's lawyer, provided by the trust, sharp and expensive, countered with Hope's medical records, the NICU stay, the bills Daniel had never paid, the disconnected phone number, the 3 years of absolute silence. David testified about finding Natalie in the hallway, about the emergency room, about the nights in the NICU when only Natalie showed up. But the judge kept coming back to one question. What was David's legal relationship to Hope? None. He was a trustee, not a guardian, not a parent, just a man who'd been there. The hearing lasted 4 days. The judge took 2 weeks to deliberate. The decision came on a Friday. David was at work when his phone rang, Natalie's name on the screen. "We lost." Her voice was hollow. "Daniel gets primary custody. I get supervised visits twice a month." David's office spun. There has to be an appeal. The lawyer says it's unlikely to succeed. Daniel has biological rights, financial stability, a 2-parent household. Natalie's breath hitched. "And I have..." "What?" "A history of infidelity in a studio apartment? You have 3 years of showing up every single day." The judge said that was admirable, but Not legally sufficient. A long pause. I have to hand her over on Monday. David left work early. Found Natalie sitting on the apartment floor with Hope in her lap, both of them surrounded by toys and books and 3 years of accumulated life. Hope, 3 years old, bright and alive and completely unaware that her world was about to shatter, looked up when David entered. "Dada!" She launched herself at him with the confidence of a child who'd never had reason to doubt she was safe. David caught her, held her tight, breathed in the smell of her shampoo and the baby lotion Natalie used and the juice box she'd spilled on her shirt earlier. "Hey, Bean," he managed. Natalie watched them with eyes that had gone beyond tears into something emptier. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "How do I give her to him? How do I explain that she's leaving?" David sat on the floor beside her, Hope still in his arms. "We don't explain. We just make Monday the best day we can. And then we trust that she'll know we're still here." "Will she?" Natalie's voice broke. "She's 3. She won't understand why we're not there. Why we're not coming to get her." David had no answer for that. He just held Hope tighter and tried not to think about the apartment without her, about the silence that would fill the spaces where her laughter used to live. Monday came too fast. They dressed Hope in her favorite outfit, packed her clothes and toys and books into 2 suitcases, made her breakfast and tried to act like this was normal, like everything was fine, like they weren't breaking into pieces inside. Daniel arrived at 10 a.m. with his wife, a polished woman in expensive clothes who smiled at Hope with the kind of warmth that looked practiced. "Hello, Hope." She crouched to Hope's level. "I'm Jennifer. We're going to have such fun together." Hope hid behind David's legs. Daniel's expression flickered. Annoyance, maybe frustration, before smoothing out. "It's okay, she'll adjust. She'll need time," Natalie said. Her voice was steady, but David could see her hands shaking. "She's not used to new people." "That's because she's been isolated," Daniel said. "She needs socialization, structure, proper education. She's 3, and developmentally delayed because she's been raised in a studio apartment by people with no qualifications." Daniel picked up the suitcases. "This is exactly why the judge made the right decision." David felt rage flash through him, bright and hot. "Don't!" Natalie's hand on his arm stopped him. "Don't," she said quietly. "Not in front of her." Daniel moved toward the door. Jennifer tried to take Hope's hand. Hope pulled away, looking back at Natalie and David with confusion turning into fear. "Mama?" Natalie knelt down, eye level with her daughter. "You're going on an adventure, baby. With Daniel and Jennifer. They have a big house and lots of space to play. I want to stay here." "I know." Natalie's voice cracked. "But you need to go with them for a while, and I'll see you soon." "I promise." "When?" 2 weeks. I'll count the days with you." Natalie pulled out the calendar they'd made together. 14 squares, 1 for each day until the next visit. "Every morning, we'll cross one off together on the phone, okay?" Hope's lower lip trembled. "Okay." Natalie hugged her daughter, held her so tight David could see the tendons in her arms straining, whispered things he couldn't hear. When she finally let go, Hope turned to David. "Dada?" David knelt beside Natalie. "I'm here, Bean. Always here. No matter where you are. Promise?" "Promise." Jennifer took Hope's hand, gently, carefully, and led her toward the door. Hope looked back 3 times. The 3rd time, she started crying. The door closed. Natalie stood frozen for 10 seconds. Then she walked calmly to the bathroom and closed the door. The sound that came through it wasn't crying. It was something deeper, something that sounded like grief trying to tear its way out through flesh. David sank onto the floor and stared at the toys Hope had left, scattered around the room. The first week was the worst. Natalie called Hope every morning at 8 a.m. sharp. Sometimes Jennifer answered, sometimes Daniel, sometimes no one, and Natalie would leave voicemails that might or might not get played. When Hope did answer, the conversations were brief, awkward. Hope would ask when she could come home, and Natalie would redirect to the calendar, to the countdown, to the promise that they'd see each other soon. David went back to work, functioned, performed tasks, came home to the apartment that felt too big and too quiet without a 3-year-old turning it upside down. He and Natalie existed in parallel, not speaking much, both trying to navigate grief that had no outlet, no resolution, no end date. The first supervised visit was in a sterile room at a family services building. 1 hour. A social worker watching from the corner, taking notes. Hope ran to Natalie the moment she saw her, wrapped her arms around her mother's neck and didn't let go for 5 full minutes. "I want to come home," Hope whispered. "Soon, baby. Soon." But they both knew it was a lie. David spent the hour playing blocks with Hope while Natalie read her stories. Normal activities made grotesque by the presence of the social worker, the ticking clock, the knowledge that in 60 minutes they'd have to say goodbye again. When the hour ended, Hope screamed, fought Jennifer's hold. Reached back toward Natalie with both arms while being carried away. Natalie waited until they were in David's car to break down. "I can't do this," she gasped between sobs. "I can't see her like that and then leave." "You have to." David's hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. "Because she needs to see you. Needs to know you're still fighting for her." "I'm not fighting. I'm just enduring." David had no response to that. Because she was right. 3 months passed. Then 6. Hope adjusted. Children were resilient, the social worker said, which felt like both a comfort and an accusation. She stopped crying when visits ended. Started talking about her new school, new friends, new room with its own bathroom. She still called Natalie Mama. Still called David Dada. But the words sounded different. More distant. Like she was remembering something from far away rather than living in it. Natalie threw herself into work, into school, into anything that would fill the hours between supervised visits. She moved through life with mechanical precision, functioning without feeling. David watched her disappear into herself and didn't know how to pull her back. And then, on a Tuesday in September, Patricia Chen called again. "Mr. Torres, I have news regarding Hope's trust." David braced himself. "What now?" "Daniel Reeves has filed a petition to dissolve the trust. He's arguing that as Hope's custodial parent, he should have control of her financial assets." "He can't do that. Victor established the trust specifically to protect his interests. Yes. Which is why Victor is fighting the petition." Patricia paused. "There's going to be another hearing. The trust lawyers want you to testify." "About what?" "About your management of the trust, your relationship with Hope, why the current structure serves her best interests." Another pause. "Daniel's lawyers are going to argue that you're financially benefiting from a child who isn't yours. They're going to make it look like you and Natalie orchestrated all of this for money." David's laugh was bitter. $500 a month, that's what I get. Barely covers the accounting courses I had to take to manage the damn trust properly. See, then testify to that. Show the records. Prove that you've been acting in Hope's interest, not your own." "When's the hearing?" 4 weeks. David hung up and told Natalie. She listened with that same hollow expression she'd worn for months. "It's never going to end, is it? The fighting? The lawyers? The using Hope as a weapon?" "No," David said honestly. "Probably not." "Then what's the point?" Why keep fighting if we're just going to keep losing? David thought about Hope, about the little girl who'd learned to walk in this apartment, who'd said her first words here, who'd called him Dada with absolute trust that he'd always be there. Because giving up means they win completely, he said, and I'm not ready to do that. The trust hearing was different from the custody battle. This time, David had evidence. 3 years of detailed financial records, every expense documented, every decision justified, every penny accounted for. Daniel's lawyers tried to paint him as incompetent, unqualified, a janitor playing accountant. David's lawyer, Victor's lawyer really, but fighting for the same goal, countered with David's degree. His current position at a reputable firm, his spotless audit record. And then they called Victor Castellano to testify. David hadn't seen Victor in 3 years. He looked the same. Tailored suit, controlled expression, eyes that evaluated everything and revealed nothing. Mr. Castellano, Daniel's lawyer began, you established this trust despite having no biological relationship to the child. Why? To protect my business interests, Victor said simply. A scandal involving my former business partner's illegitimate child would have been problematic. The trust eliminated that problem. So this was never about helping the child? I don't make decisions based on sentiment. I make them based on calculated benefit. Victor's gaze shifted to Daniel. The trust serves its purpose. Hope receives care without creating liability for me. Mr. Torres manages it competently. Dissolving it serves no one except Mr. Reeves, who apparently believes he's entitled to assets he never contributed to. Daniel's face flushed. That's my daughter's money. It's my money, Victor corrected coldly. Placed in trust for your daughter's benefit. You abandoned her when she was born. You contributed nothing to her medical care, her housing, her survival. You have no moral or legal claim to control assets you never earned. The courtroom went silent. Daniel's lawyer tried to recover. Mr. Castellano, isn't it true that you're only maintaining this trust to maintain control over your ex-wife? No. Victor's expression didn't change. I have no interest in controlling Natalie. I have interest in ensuring my financial decisions are executed as intended. Mr. Torres does that. Mr. Reeves would not. The judge asked Victor about David's qualifications, about the trust's performance, about whether he believed Hope's interests were being served. Victor answered every question with clinical precision. No emotion, no warmth. Just facts. But the facts were clear. The trust was well managed. Hope's needs were met. David was competent. Daniel had no legal grounds to interfere. The judge ruled in favor of maintaining the trust structure. Daniel left the courtroom looking like he'd been slapped. Victor left without acknowledging David or Natalie at all. But as he passed, David heard him say, so quietly it might have been imagined, "Continue doing your job properly." It wasn't approval, it wasn't reconciliation, but it was something. The trust victory didn't change custody. Hope still lived with Daniel. Natalie still got supervised visits twice a month. David still went to work and came home to an apartment that felt empty. But something had shifted. The constant legal pressure eased. Daniel backed off, apparently realizing he'd hit the limit of what he could take. The supervised visits became unsupervised. 2 hours became 4. Once a month became twice. Hope, now 4, started asking why she couldn't live with Mama and Dada again. Neither Natalie nor David had a good answer. And then, 10 months after the trust hearing, Jennifer called. Not Daniel. Jennifer. Natalie? Her voice was strained. It's Jennifer Reeves. I need to talk to you about Hope. Natalie's hand tightened on the phone. Is she okay? She's not happy. She cries for you every night. She acts out at school. The therapist says she's experiencing attachment disruption. Natalie closed her eyes. What do you want me to do about it? Jennifer stopped, started again. Daniel won't admit this isn't working. But it's not. Hope needs you. Needs David. This arrangement is hurting her. You're just realizing this now? I'm realizing that winning custody doesn't mean we won. Jennifer's voice dropped. Daniel wanted to be a father, but he doesn't want to do the work. He's traveling constantly, leaving me to manage a child who doesn't know me, doesn't want to know me, just wants to go home. Then let her come home. It's not that simple. Daniel would never. Then what are you calling for? Natalie's voice hardened. To tell me my daughter is miserable? I know. I see it every time I have to say goodbye to her. I'm calling to ask for help. Jennifer sounded close to tears. If you and Daniel could work out a different arrangement, shared custody maybe, something where Hope spends more time with you. Daniel would never agree to that. He might, if it came from his therapist, if the evidence was clear that Hope needs more time with her mother. A pause. I can make sure the evidence is clear. Natalie looked at David, who'd been listening to every word. Why would you help me? Natalie asked Jennifer. Because I'm not a monster, and because that little girl deserves to be with the people who actually love her. Jennifer's voice went quiet. I thought I could make this work. Thought I could be her mother. But she already has a mother. She's just not allowed to be with her. It took 3 months. 3 months of therapist reports and behavioral assessments and careful documentation of Hope's deteriorating emotional state. Daniel fought it. Argued that Hope just needed more time to adjust, but the evidence was overwhelming, and eventually even his lawyers advised him to compromise. The new custody arrangement. Hope would live with Natalie and David during the week. Daniel would have her on weekends. Holidays would alternate. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what any of them had wanted originally, but it was better. The day Hope moved back into the studio apartment, now slightly bigger, in a slightly better building, but still fundamentally the same, she walked through the door and said, I'm home. Natalie broke down crying. Hope, who'd learned too much about grief for a 4-year-old, just hugged her mother and said, It's okay, Mama, I'm here now. Life stabilized again. Different this time, more complicated. Hope had 2 homes, 2 sets of rules, 2 families who would never fully reconcile but had learned to coexist for her sake. Natalie finished her degree, got a full-time position at the nonprofit, started helping other women navigate the systems she'd barely survived. David made senior accountant, started teaching a night class at the community college, financial literacy for low-income adults. They moved to a 2-bedroom apartment. Hope got her own room, decorated it with drawings and books and the stuffed animals she shuttled back and forth between her 2 lives. She called David Dada and Daniel Father. The distinction was subtle but absolute. On Hope's 5th birthday, both families attended her party. Natalie and David in their small apartment, Daniel and Jennifer arriving with expensive gifts and uncomfortable smiles. Hope blew out her candles and wished for something she whispered only to Natalie. I wish everyone would stop fighting. After the party, after Daniel and Jennifer left, after Hope was asleep in her own bed, Natalie and David sat in the tiny living room with cold coffee and exhaustion. We did it, Natalie said quietly. We actually did it. Did what? Survived. All of us. She looked at David. You know I never thanked you. Not really. For that night. For everything after. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Natalie's eyes were serious. You could have walked away 100 times. Should have walked away. But you didn't. You stayed. For a woman you didn't know and a baby who wasn't yours. Why? David thought about that night in the hallway. About the woman in the silk robe, bleeding and alone, about the choice he'd made without fully understanding it. Because someone had to, he said finally. And I was there. That's not a reason. It's the only reason I have. David met her gaze. Everything else, the trust, the lawyers, the custody battles, that all came after. But that first night, I just saw someone who needed help and I had a car. Natalie laughed, quiet and genuine. You had a 15-year-old Honda with a cracked windshield. Still counted as transportation. They sat in comfortable silence. In the next room, Hope stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about cake. She's going to be okay, Natalie said. Isn't she? Yeah, David said. She is. Because Hope had something that transcended biology or money or legal arrangements. She had people who showed up, who stayed, who fought for her even when the fight seemed impossible. She had family. Complicated, imperfect, hard-won. But real. 5 years later, on Hope's 10th birthday, she asked Natalie a question. Mama, can David adopt me? Like officially? Natalie and David were in the kitchen, preparing for another awkward two-family birthday celebration. They both froze. Why do you want that baby? Natalie asked carefully. Because he's my dad. Not father, Daniel, but my actual dad. The one who taught me to ride a bike and helps me with homework and comes to all my school things even when he's tired. Hope looked between them. Father pays for stuff, but David shows up. Isn't that what dads are supposed to do? Natalie's eyes filled with tears. David crouched to Hope's level. That's complicated, Bean. I'd have to ask your father, and he might say no. Then ask him. Hope. Ask him, she repeated, with the absolute confidence of a child who'd learned that speaking up could change things. Please? David looked at Natalie. She nodded. Okay, David said. I'll ask. Daniel said no. Of course he said no. His lawyers sent a formal letter declining to terminate parental rights, citing his financial contributions, his weekend custody, his role in Hope's life. Hope took the news with surprising calm. That's okay. I know who my real dad is anyway. She was right. The legal documents didn't change the reality of their lives. Didn't change who packed Hope's lunches or attended parent-teacher conferences or stayed up late helping with science projects. Daniel remained Hope's biological father, remained a presence in her life, distant, transactional, but present. But David was Dada, and no court ruling could change that. Years passed. Hope grew. Graduated elementary school, then middle school. Started high school with her mother's determination and David's steady pragmatism. The trust remained intact. Victor never contacted them again, but the quarterly disbursements continued like clockwork. Hope's college fund grew. Her future took shape. Natalie eventually started dating, carefully, cautiously, with all the wisdom of someone who'd learned the hard way what mattered. She met someone kind, someone ordinary, someone who showed up. David stayed single. Dedicated himself to work, to hope, to the quiet satisfaction of building a life that meant something beyond just survival. And then, the week before Hope's 18th birthday, they received a letter. From Victor Castellano. Natalie opened it with shaking hands. The trust will dissolve on Hope's 18th birthday, as per the original terms. All remaining assets will transfer to her directly. Your services as trustee are complete, Mr. Torres. I'm told Hope has been accepted to 3 universities, that she's planning to study social work like her mother. This is acceptable. The enclosed check represents a final disbursement, not from the trust, but from my personal accounts. Consider it payment for services rendered over the past 18 years. You exceeded expectations. Regards, Victor Castellano. The check was for $500,000. David stared at it, unable to process the number. "He paid you," Natalie whispered. "After everything, after treating us like a problem to be managed, he paid you." "Not me," David said slowly. "Us. For raising her." They stood together in the apartment, now a decent 2-bedroom in a building with reliable heat, holding a check that represented more money than either of them had ever imagined having. "What do we do with it?" Natalie asked. David thought about the past 18 years, about midnight feedings and custody battles and supervised visits, about a 3-year-old crying for home and a 10-year-old asking to be adopted, about showing up day after day when it would have been so much easier to walk away. "We split it," he said. "Use it to make sure we're stable. Make sure Hope doesn't have to worry about us the way we worried about ourselves." That's fair," David said firmly. We did this together. We split it evenly." Natalie looked at the check. At David. At the life they'd built from nothing but stubbornness and the refusal to abandon a child who needed them. "Okay," she said. "Together." Hope's 18th birthday was small. Just the people who mattered. Natalie and David. Hope's boyfriend, a quiet kid from her debate team. A few close friends. Daniel came, brought an expensive gift, stayed for an hour, made small talk, and left. After the party, after everyone else had gone home, Hope sat with Natalie and David in the living room. "I have something to tell you both," she said. They waited. "I got a full scholarship to college. The trust fund. I'm not going to need it." "Not for school, anyway." "Hope, that's incredible," Natalie started. "And I want to use it differently." Hope looked between them. "I want to put half of it toward a down payment on a house, for you two. Something better than this apartment, something that's actually yours." "We can't accept that," David began. "Yes, you can. It's my money now. I can do whatever I want with it." Hope's voice was certain. "And I want you to have a home, a real one, after everything you gave up for me." "We didn't give up anything," Natalie said softly. "We gained everything." "Then call it a thank you." Hope smiled. "For showing up when no one else did. For fighting when it would have been easier to quit. For being my real family when the legal one fell apart." David felt something tighten in his chest. "Bean, I mean it." Hope's eyes were Natalie's eyes, dark and determined and absolutely certain. "You saved my life. Both of you. Let me give you something back." They argued for an hour. Hope won. She usually did. 6 months later, Natalie and David moved into a small house with a yard. Hope came home from college on weekends to help paint walls and plant flowers and turn empty rooms into a home that finally matched what they'd built together. Daniel sent a housewarming gift, expensive, impersonal. Victor sent nothing, but his silence felt different now, like acknowledgement rather than dismissal. Hope graduated college with honors, went on to graduate school, built a career helping families navigate the same systems that had nearly destroyed hers. She never legally changed her name, remained Hope Reeves on paper. But everyone who mattered knew her as Hope Torres. Natalie eventually married the kind man she'd been dating, had a quiet ceremony in the backyard of the house Hope had helped them buy. David was her man of honor. Hope cried through the entire ceremony. David stayed single, stayed dedicated to his work, to his students, to the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. And sometimes, late at night, he'd think about that moment in the hallway 18 years ago, about the choice he'd made without fully understanding its weight, about how a single decision, to help a stranger when walking away would have been easier, had changed the trajectory of 3 lives. About how showing up day after day, year after year, was its own form of heroism. He never regretted it. Not once. 20 years after that night in the penthouse hallway, David received one final letter from Victor Castellano. Mr. Torres, I'm dying. Cancer, the doctors say. 6 months, perhaps less. I've lived a calculated life, made decisions based on benefit and liability, maximized profit, minimized risk. I'm told this is called success. But I find myself thinking about a janitor who showed up at 2 a.m. to advocate for a child who wasn't his, who signed papers that bound him to responsibility most people would have fled, who spent 20 years proving that dedication matters more than biology. You did something I never could. You chose compassion over calculation. Hope doesn't carry my blood, doesn't carry my name, but she carries the benefit of my resources because you ensured they were used correctly. That's something. My will has been updated. You'll find you've been named, not as a beneficiary, but as executor of a new charitable trust, for families in crisis, for children who need someone to show up. I expect you to manage it as competently as you manage Hope's trust. This is not sentiment. This is recognition of demonstrated capability. Regards, Victor Castellano. Victor died 3 months later. The funeral was enormous. Politicians and business leaders and society figures. David attended, standing in the back watching strangers mourn a man they'd probably feared more than loved. Natalie and Hope came with him. As they filed past the casket, Hope paused. "Should I feel something?" she asked quietly. "He helped me. In his way. But I never knew him." "You don't have to feel anything," David said. "He didn't do it for your gratitude." Then why did he do it? David thought about Victor's letters, about cold calculations that had saved a child's life, about a man who'd chosen to help in the only way he knew how. Because it was the smart play, David said, and because maybe at the end he wanted to do something that mattered. They left the funeral and went home, to the house Hope had bought them, to the life they'd built from broken pieces. That night, Hope posted a picture on social media, just a simple photo of the three of them in the backyard, laughing at something no one else would understand. The caption read, "Family isn't who you're born to, it's who shows up." Within an hour, it had thousands of likes, hundreds of comments from people sharing their own stories of found family, of people who'd stayed when they could have left, of love that transcended biology and law and expectation. David read through them with something like wonder, because Hope was right. Family wasn't blood. It wasn't legal documents or trust funds or custody arrangements. It was showing up, day after day, year after year. It was choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. It was 18 years of midnight feedings and custody battles and supervised visits and ordinary miracles. It was love, complicated and imperfect and absolutely real. So here's my question for you. If you found someone desperate and alone, would you walk past? Or would you stop, even knowing the cost, even knowing it might change your entire life? Because sometimes the smallest choice, helping a stranger in a hallway, becomes the foundation of something extraordinary. Think about the people who showed up for you. Think about the times you showed up for someone else. That's what family really is? What would you have done in David's place? Let me know in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, hit that like button and subscribe. I'll be sharing more stories about the families we choose and the love we build from nothing. See you in the next one.